persuade them that it would be a hugely beneficial reform for the economy, for the center, and for the states.
All right, I have, I think, only 3 or 4 minutes left, maybe even less than that. Let's come in that limited time to the question whether or not the public exchequer suffered a loss as a result of the 2G spectrum sale as alleged by the CAG. You've refuted the claim that the money earned by Unitech and Swan by selling part of their equity is an accurate measure of the money lost by the exchequer, and you have 3 grounds for refuting it. One, you say this was fresh equity, it diluted the promoter share. Secondly, you say this money went to the company, not to the promoter. And third, you say the money was used to roll out services. All of that may be true, but can you deny that the sale of equity led to a massive upward re-evaluation of the spectrum the government sold, and that alone shows that you sold cheaply?
Very long and complicated question. I hope
but accurate.
No. I hope your viewers followed all that. But let me make.
Are you flammable?
The most important thing when you look at the 2G issue is that you got to realize that government was not actually trying to get the highest price. As a matter of fact, if you look at government policy, 10th plan, TRAI, everybody, the issue was that let us make sure that 2G spectrum is allocated in a way that will enable a more rapid rollout of services. That is, by the way, not an unreasonable approach at all. And there are many cases where government has a resource which, if it was solely interested in maximizing revenue, it could sell it at a higher price, but it chooses not to because keeping the price a bit lower helps in the spread. And I think my criticism of the CAG report is that it doesn't address that issue at all. It simply says, you could have got this much price, and if you didn't get this much price, that's a loss. Well, I don't think that's not, I think, putting it the way it should be put. Now, the specific question you asked about the Swan Unitech issue, there's a huge difference, in my view, between selling your equity, because if a company has a spectrum as a resource, then in a way you might say that the equity has that as a resource, and therefore you sell the equity, what you are getting is in some sense a compensation for giving up some right on that resource. It's a very different thing if you say, I've got this spectrum, I don't have the resources to fully roll out the stuff, so I'm going to bring in new equity and put money into the company and use that for expansion. So to treat that money as if it measures the value of the resource is just, in my view, wrong.
Let me come back like this. There's no doubt that the promoters diluted their equity when they sold part of it. But given the fact that they got 3 or 4 times what they could.
They didn't get, the company got 3 or 4 times. This is the point.
But the point I'm making is this, given that the company got 3 or 4 times what they paid for the entire amount when they only sold a fraction, clearly suggests that you have...
Let me give you an example.
You aren't letting me finish.
No, but you made that point. I want to interrupt here.
Okay.
Suppose you were a company which had that resource and you went and got somebody to give you a loan 5 times what you paid, and that loan came into the company, would you suddenly say that the spectrum is worth that much? I mean, if you have to roll out services, you need money.
But the loan
hang on. One guy gets a loan, the other guy gets equity. In the former case, you wouldn't say that that's value of spectrum.
The only thing the company had was spectrum. So when the equity goes up by 3 or 4 times what they paid for it, and they've only sold a small proportion, that means the valuation of the spectrum has gone up. And if the valuation of the spectrum has gone up so decisively, it suggests that the government undersold. That's a simple point. That's what I'm making.
No, I mean, that is the consequence of the dilution effect. Now, this is too difficult, I think, to put across in a TV interview. The limited point I'm making is there seems to be, it would be very different if somebody were to sell their own equity, take the money out, and simply say, well, right, I have the spectrum, I've sold half my interest in the spectrum, and this is what it's worth. It's quite different to saying, I needed some money, so I've got some money in, in that process, the pricing of the new equity is obviously higher than my equity. Maybe there's a gain, maybe not. It's a much more complicated calculation that you have to make. And I think that the problem is that's not been done, and an impression is being created that self-evidently there's been a huge misappropriation of resources. And I think that's slightly misleading.
Okay, can I one last time, and I'll then move on to something else, make you address this following. What they sold was spectrum. That's what the equity represented. That's all the company had. And they sold a small proportion for a figure that was 4 times what they paid for the original.
Well,
the whole thing.
I don't remember the actual...
That the government's valuation of the spectrum was grossly wrong. You undervalued the spectrum you were selling. If you had valued it higher, you could have got more. And the companies would have rolled out services just as fast, because just to complete, Swan even 3 years later hasn't rolled out services.
No, I'm not holding a brief for any of these companies. In fact, one of the key allegations of the CAG report, which I think is actually an important one, is that some of the companies that got licenses shouldn't have got licenses at all. I have no idea whether these companies fall in that category or not. So I'm not holding a brief for any of these companies. The limited point I'm making is that when you have a company which gets a resource, and that company finances its expansion by issuing new equity, I don't think you can treat that new equity, which is not a sale of your equity, you cannot treat that as the value of the spectrum. Because remember, when new equity is brought into the company, I mean, that money is also with the company, and that's going to be used to roll out something. And how valuable that equity is, I mean, the value the market places on it just depends on what they think the company is going to do in future, how much profits it's going to make, all of which is based on assumptions.
One last question, and we have only really 30 seconds before we go off air with this particular program. If you were to discover that the new money hasn't gone into the company, but it's been in one way or another siphoned out by the promoters, would you then call for cancellation of that particular...
No, look, in any corporate activity, anything that is a siphoning out of money from a company is ipso facto a case of misperformance and deserves to be gone into. So the moment you use the term siphoning out, corporate governance is not supposed to involve siphoning out. If there is siphoning out, there's something wrong.
If I withdraw the word siphoning out and say that in fact if this money becomes the promoter's money, not the company's money, would you still call for the cancellation of the license?
No, I think, a general policy cannot be evaluated on the basis of any kind of wrong thing that one particular person does. But as I said, if there is proof that somebody has siphoned off, that's something clearly wrong, and it should be gone into.
All right. On that note, Montek Singh, Ahluwalia, we've run right out of time. My thanks to you for sharing with us your perspective on the Indian economy, and in particular, explaining to us how you view this question of 2G loss, or the allegation of 2G loss, and this whole issue of whether the money earned by Unitech and Swan is tantamount to the loss incurred by the government. There we end this particular part of tonight's function. We're going to go off air with this particular program, but Shireen will be back soon with more guests. Goodbye from me.
IRB and CNBC TV 18 present Budget 2011, the macro backdrop.